Good evening, everyone. I want to say first off, I apologize. I was made aware in the middle of the intro that there was not sound, so I will make sure that at the conclusion of our live, that I will make sure that as we leave, that I will show it one more time, and hopefully it will work this time. So I do apologize for that. But again, thank you all for joining us tonight for PickEd Speaks, our very first one. I wanted to do this because of the fact that I received a lot of um, communication from a lot of you all when we did our 7 days for the book until I finished. And I definitely wanted to create a platform and an environment and space where we can have open dialogue and conversation. And I wanted to bring on individuals to have those conversations with. And there was absolutely no better person that I knew to start my first one off with this particular individual who I have joining me today. This is a friend, this is a brother who has been a colleague of mine for 15 years, something like that. I'm trying to
Nearly
remember
20 years.
I remember how long it's been since I was a freshman and then you were ahead of me. But Quardricos Driskell is an amazing preacher, a political science professor, columnist, commentator. Is an amazing overall individual with a wealth of knowledge. And this particular brother, I wanted to make sure that no matter what, I started my conversation with. This is someone I can truly and honestly say is a friend and a brother, and I do not hesitate by saying that. So again, thank you so much, Brother Driskell, for joining us tonight. If you could just do us all a favor and kind of give everyone who's watching an opportunity to learn who you are and just kind of your background.
Oh, brother, you have highly exaggerated my being, and it does me no harm, and also does me every bit of good, and so I appreciate that. Brother, I am just another brother out here trying to make it. I work in the field of policy and politics in Washington, D.C. I spend my time between Atlanta and D.C., more often than not in DC, working on behalf of healthcare policy, which includes health disparities that exist within our community. I also teach on the side and do a little of everything else on the side. So that's a sufficient intro.
Awesome. And so everyone knows I'm broadcasting live from Atlanta. And Driskell is in Alexandria, but his home is where I'm broadcasting from. He is
That's correct.
A proud alum of. Do I want to say your high school? Do I want to go there? Do you want to?
Yes, I'm a graduate of Tri-Cities High School.
Tri-Cities High School, and I'm only saying that because I know for a fact that I believe Dan Sims is watching, and so I know I wanted to make sure, and I have a lot of friends and colleagues who are Tri-Cities alum and who are watching, and so I wanted to make sure that I put that out there. And of course, if nothing else, he then went on to one of the best institutions in the world, and I was even honored to say that it was a great privilege to see him be asked back to speak among such amazing individuals this year for the Founders Day convocation. Is that correct? You're the
convocation. That is correct, yes.
And so how was that experience? How was that experience kind of coming full circle and being able to speak and not only in front of peers and colleagues, but those individuals who poured into you, and now you're able to pour into the next generation. How did that experience feel for you?
In many ways, I think I'm still processing it. Surreal comes to mind, actually. So I spoke, as Dr. Pickett said, at the 153rd Founders Day convocation at Morehouse. And I remember when I got the call, the individual who told me that I would be speaking said, "Are you sitting down? Because your feet needs to be planted on the ground when you get this news." I just celebrated a virtual 15 years. My 15-year college reunion, and so having to be the Founders Day convocation speaker during my reunion year, and a young alum, was really surreal.
Mm-hmm. And again, for those of us watching it, again, it was amazing experience, just again to see those of us who are now changing. It's almost like the changing of the guards. A lot of us who were the
Right.
younger crew and now taking on those responsibilities and those roles. And so again, it was just a great experience to see. But tonight, I definitely called upon Driskell tonight because many of us who have been watching. Obviously, the news and many of the other social media outlets, we have seen so many different things over the course of these last couple of weeks, and obviously we can't run from it. We can't hide from it. It's definitely something that is in our face, it's in our existence. And I know for a fact that it's not necessarily a full conversation that we always like to have or even want to have. And truth to be told, I'm very clear that I'm still processing the whole premise of how I feel in it. And so many of the conversations and many of the things you will hear tonight is more so of question asking and just getting a feel of where we are. And please, by all means, if you have comments, if you have questions, there is you can please log them on as you're watching. Please throw questions, throw comments. We want to make sure that we're sharing your comments, and we won't even have a discussion about that. There is an opportunity for you also to call in. There is a calling number. You may see it scrolling now. 404-234-8937. You can actually call that number. We will actually have you broadcast it live, and you'll be able to answer, ask your question, or maybe even make your comment verbally. So please, if you want to actually speak your comment and actually be a part of the conversation, you can call that number. You may also, if you don't necessarily want to actually verbally say it, but actually just want to put it on the screen, by all means, share that as well. And we will definitely make sure that information is heard. So just to kind of start the conversation off, one of the aspects in the video that we saw was Mayor Bowser, who made a bold move in the DC area and not just used her mouth, but she used her platform. And she decided that she was going to paint the road that is leading up to 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue with Black Lives Matter. What would you say has been, if any, what has been the conversation for those in the DMV area who've been to it, who have seen it? What's been the conversation, and then what is your feel? What do you feel about her stance and the people in your area stance on what's going on, and maybe some of the comments that the president has made about all of it?
So the general sentiment for those who live in the DMV area and who have seen it is one of excitement, is one of acknowledgement, because I think it's one of pride. I read that our congressman, John Lewis, walked along the street, which is 16th Street, in front of the White House, and felt a sense of pride in this moment that the mayor would take such a bold action. Of course, then you have those who necessarily don't like it. In fact, there is a man who lives, to my understanding, outside of the DC area, who is suing the mayor. The alleged lawsuit, I think, is poppycock in many respects, where he's claiming that Black Lives Matter is a cult, so he's using religious basis to say that the mayor is favoring one religion over the other because Black Lives Matter, quote, is a religious cult. Again, I don't think the lawsuit has any particular basis, but again, I just want to acknowledge that there are people, of course, who are against it and using legal means to sue the mayor for it. Thirdly, my personal feelings about this, and I think this speaks to a larger conversation and a larger movement that we are seeing. Black electoral success, while it is great and while symbiotic and substantial representation and symbolic representation is important, and the halls of Congress and the general assemblies across this country, even at the most basic local levels, Black electoral success, unfortunately, has not translated into qualitative improvements in Black life. And so when the mayor decided to paint Black Lives Matter in front of the White House on 16th Street, The reality is there are a lot of people in the Black communities in DC who are very apathetic towards Mayor Bowser. And that's because they feel that she is helping to push gentrification along, and she's having multiple conversations and a very good relationship with the development community, which of course is driving out the Black population. And so in many respects, many within this area don't think that the mayor's symbolic gesture matches up with her policy. And I think this speaks to, again, a larger issue that when you have those symbolic gestures, but it does not couple policy change to policy solutions to change the systemic issues within our country, then it erodes Black participation in the political process, which includes voting.
And actually brings up a good conversation or a good topic because of the fact that even here in Atlanta, there have been some individuals who have had some choice words or even ideas about the sitting mayor and some of her decisions, especially when the young people were out protesting. Right. I was actually out with the young people the very first protest. I was out.
Well, you're still young, my friend.
Yeah, but the ones who were out there were who took it to the next level were a little younger than me. But the young people that were there, especially and I want to applaud, first of all, a lot of the young people that were out there because of the fact that it takes a lot to put yourself on the line. But one of the things that we noticed, particularly with the mayor, is when those young people decided to put their voices out there and to take a stance, the mayor went more so into chastisement mode rather than understanding and empathy mode. And many people took that as not really understanding. And then, of course, there were moments where even some of her Facebook messages, her Twitter messages, didn't necessarily match exactly what she was saying. And so, what do you think? What do you think, especially these elected officials who, like mayors and things, what do you think that they could do, if anything, to provide some sense of reassurance to the people that they have a leader who is not just doing it for political, but doing it to make a statement so that their voices are heard and that they feel like they are at the table as well?
Well, first addressing Mayor Keisha Lance Bottoms, when she was, to your point, chastising the younger people that were out there protesting, telling them to go home, this is your city, this is your community. When I saw that, I thought she was completely tone deaf. And the elephant in the room, Brother PickEd, is that there is a chasm, if you will, between those supposedly well-educated, relatively economically stable members of the Black business, Black professional, and Black political class versus the rest of Black life. The reality is those within the petit bourgeois have more to lose than those who are on the very bottom rung of the economic ladder, the least, the lost, and the left behind. Those, by and large, are the people out there protesting and who are angry. And so when you're talking about some sort of reassurance to calm their fears and their anxieties, it's very simple. I know politics is often a very long-term game. I know changes don't happen overnight, but it is about ensuring that you are not necessarily a part of the system, or that when you're elected, that you don't become part of the system, but that you keep in mind the very same people and the communities to which you come from or that elected you. It is about policy changes. We saw, of course, given the yet unfortunate murder of yet another Black man, another Black body, life taken by state-sanctioned terror, APD, Atlanta Police Department, and then, of course, the chief of police resigns. Well, the reality is Chief Shields probably never should have been there in the first place. And so when you appoint people, and yet the structures within government agencies, including the police department, including the General Assembly, don't change, then what do we think happens? Right. And we all know what King said about riot, what the language of the unheard. And when you have overall conditions of poverty, you're going to see less and less of lower income Black people participating in the political process. And if they're going to participate, they're going to participate what they're doing now by their constitutional right to protest. And sometimes that protest might be rioting and violent.
Mm-hmm. And it's so interesting because of the fact that we just recently had elections, particularly here in Atlanta, in Georgia, last week. And of course, we made national news once again. Not for anything amazing, not because we just did an amazing job with the elections, but because of the fact that we botched it and we did a piss poor job. So much so that even you, someone who votes with absentee, did not get your ballot until after the election. I remember getting that text message like, "Hey, I just got it. Like, do I send it or?" And
which I still mailed in and voted.
And it's like all these things, and so many people, and that kind of goes to the conversation why the topic was, this whole, the ballot box. Is it a position of power or is it poison? Because of the fact that there's so many individuals who, when they see stuff like that happen, when they see the disenfranchisement, they see, the voter suppression happening, which clearly there was so many issues. And a friend of mine who I'm sure is watching right now, she and I've had discussions about if we would have done it right 2 years ago, we really would be in this situation. And that's not just for, and I want to be very clear when I tell the people, that's not just for the governor position. If we would have gotten this right in the Secretary of State's position, if we would have got this right, in our labor commission, like there were so many positions on the ballot other than the gubernatorial seat that if we would have actually spent the time and actually got that right, then we would have done it. But why do you think, especially now with that happening and we, having those issues, how do we still encourage people? How do we still get people? Because now we have runoffs in about 2 months, I guess less than 2 months, and then we still have an election in November. How do we encourage people? How do we have those conversations with individuals to get back out? Especially after seeing what they saw, how do we encourage, that young brother who's out there feeling like his voice is not heard, the one who's out there protesting and they're not feeling like politicians care about them or even hear their voices? How do we speak to them to say, yo, go get to that ballot box to make change? How do we speak that language to them?
I think it's going to be incumbent upon the entire community, right? We know the old African proverb that it takes a village to raise a child. Well, it's going to take a village to get out and vote. And I think we first have to be honest with younger people, because the reality is, unfortunately, I believe that this is going to happen again come November in Georgia. I mean, we know the problems. It starts at leadership. And we know that Republicans are using all sorts of tactics to ensure that Democrats and Black folk don't vote. And so it's going to take the entire community to get the word out. It's going to take those running on the ballot who are Democrats and who are Black to actually educate people about absentee ballot. It's going to take them even, dare I say, printing out the application and passing it out, making sure it gets in the mail for their absentee ballots to be sent. That's the type of really grassroots educating it's going to take in order for turnout, in order for Democrats, I think, particularly to win in Atlanta and in the state of Georgia. That's the first thing. Secondly, we need to be very honest with our younger citizens and residents. We need to tell them, look, we know that voting has not had the level of change and the pendulum of justice has not shifted towards you. We understand that. But there's a better chance that it will, although it might be gradual, if you elect the people who best represent our interests and your interests particularly. I think that is the most basic, honest, and realistic explanation that we can actually tell our people, tell young people particularly. Not that, oh, you need to vote, you need to vote, you need to vote, but you have to explain to them why they voted. And to be honest, it's going to be a very hard conversation. When you look at the cities across the country, and this is probably whether they put it on social media, spoiler alert, or unpopular opinion. When you look at the cities across the country, even when you looked at when Michael Brown and Trayvon Martin were murdered, and the list goes on, it happened under Black administrations. It happened under Black leadership. It happened under a Black president. And yet these mayors, these members of the General Assembly, and even the president, in some ways, for those particularly disenfranchised in our community, it was just a symbol of powerlessness. That even at the highest levels, they had absolutely no power to stop Black bodies from being murdered. So let us think about that for a second, and then try to convince a 22-year-old who possibly in their early adolescent years lived through this and saw this, and tell them that voting all of a sudden is going to change that. That is very hard. And I think it requires an honest and open conversation that over the past 20 years, dare we say, that voting has not lended the type of benefits that we would have liked to see. However, there have been some substantial changes. The primary change, of course, that we see is that who's in the White House. So we do know that voting has consequences. And if we want to continue to push the needle, as slow as that needle might be, then you have to vote.
Mm-hmm. And you touched something, and I want to kind of go back to that. This concept of making sure that we vote for individuals who have our interest at heart and who understand us. There were so many elections this last cycle that people ran in positions and ran in areas that no one really knew. This is not my. I'm not going to use this platform to blast anybody or put anybody out there, but I am going to talk about one particular race, and it may be unpopular, but I don't care. There was a particular race where, in a predominantly African American community, a former elected official moved into this particular community, and ran. And only had lived there maybe about a year to a year some change, and won the seat. Is now going back to the state legislature. And this was a white individual who ran in a Black predominantly African American community or district, and won the seat, all because of either because people said that this person was a nice person, or people said this, whatever the reasoning may have been. And again, I don't dislike this individual. I think this person is an amazing person, but I find that interesting that there were other candidates in that particular race who had lived in that community, who had worked in that community, who has known that community, and did not get the same support as this other counterpart. Where do you think that stems from? How do you think that, this particular white candidate was able to kind of come in, drop herself into it, and win the seat? Almost not even having a campaign, really.
Part of this is voter turnout. I'm not sure which particular precinct or district that you are referring to, but part of it is, I think, turnout. What we do know, of course, is that turnout was low. I think the second piece of this was education. People, voters are very tricky individuals, and there are people like myself who actually study how people vote. And part of politics is campaigning. But you're saying, of course, if this candidate didn't necessarily campaign and somehow they came in and they found their way into now the seat. Well, what they did do is they campaigned to the right people who they knew were going to vote, right? So again, I think this is a lesson to Democrats, particularly and politicians broadly who wish to be elected. You have to campaign to the people who you know is going to vote. Republicans know that their base is going to vote. But the reality is the tide is shifting in Georgia, right? We know that upwards of 50% of voters, or could be voters, are racial minorities, Blacks, Latinos, and Asians. Republicans in the state, and dare I say across the country, don't want Democrats and Black voters and other racial minority voters to vote. Because when they vote and when they turn out, particularly with the absentee ballot, that's why we have 45 talking about, oh, mail-in ballot is a fraud, because they know he has so much as said it. And so it's going to be incumbent upon the candidates running in these specific areas to talk about not just the importance of voting, but talk about how they wish to change those communities. And I think it's up to the voters and those young people who are out there protesting included to hold them accountable to ensure that real policy solutions and changes are being made.
And so I do kind of want to touch this because the fact that we've talked about the Republicans knowing their base, right, and Republicans knowing and obviously seeing that shifting and things of that magnitude. I am curious to know, when we were, especially being in college, I remember us definitely being on two ends of the spectrum. At one point in time, I was hot, diehard, heavy Democrat, and you were diehard, heavy Republican, or we could say that. I guess we can say.
But I was a Republican.
but we we still had a common ground, but obviously our parties definitely differed. You have in past conversations have been open and honest, and you even actually wrote, I believe, an op-ed on it about this conversation around why some Black people are leaving the Republican Party, not being the Republican Party that that Black individuals signed up for originally, right. When they were part of that. What is it that you think has been the message that is now taking some African Americans from the Republican Party and saying, you know what, I'm aligning. I may not necessarily even align with the Democrat. I might even be just independent. But what do you think is the message or person or persons that is changing the kind of the trajectory of how African Americans are now politically aligning themselves?
Well, the message that they're getting is that the party is dominated and, quite honestly, run by old white men, primarily old white people who wish to make America great again, a dog whistle from Reagan, as we know. The Republican Party has been overrun and overtaken, unfortunately, by a lot of fascist racists within our country. Both parties have had elements of racism and white supremacy. This is no secret. But when I think you have a party that's aligning with these very fringe groups and fringe individuals, we see that. And that's exactly what happened with the Republican Party. And they are so extreme and, quite frankly, racist in some of their views that one who is of color has no choice but to either leave or to have a serious crisis of conscience if they're going to remain in the party. I have friends who are African American who are saying, well, it's not the party that I joined, and my goal is to get it to where it used to be, get it to the party of Jack Kemp and Mitt Romney, who is the last true Republicans I think we have left, him and Senator Scott. And I tell them very simply, well, good luck and best wishes, because and we do know again that constituencies shift and politics change, but what we see is a party that is predominantly beholden by a certain generational demographic and a certain race, and even, dare I say, a certain religion.
And since you mentioned Mitt Romney, Mitt Romney has, in the most recent of times, has, I think, shocked I don't know, maybe not shocked, but I think in people who aren't necessarily familiar with Mitt Romney, I think he has shocked quite a bit of people in a lot of his decisions that he has made in the most recent times.
Right.
One of the few Democrats or Republicans who have been seen, out talking and being with protesters. Who one of the few people, one of the only individual who went against party to and said that what this is deeper than political. This is different. This is deeper than party. At the end of the day, this is about country, and put that aside. And then, of course, even made it very clear that he was going to endorse, the Democratic the presumptive, or I guess technically once until we get to the presumptive Democratic nominee for the White House. He has really taken a stance. Do you see more Republicans, either in Congress or just nationally? Do you see any of them taking that same approach, or do you think that they're going to still kind of keep it to the grand old party approach and kind of keep it where loyalty speaks louder than party?
Sadly, no, because if they were going to do it, they would have done it already, and they have not.
Mm-hmm.
I think we see three Republicans who are not afraid to speak out and to go against this president and this party. Those three are Lisa Murkowski, I think that's how you pronounce her last name, which I should know, of Alaska. You see Mitt Romney, and you see Tim Scott. The rest are putting party over country. We all know that the diabolical majority leader, Mitch McConnell, is, of course, set on allowing the country to fail and to collapse in many respects so that he may be able to maintain power and control and party majority in the Senate. He has so much as echoed that and said that, and he's willing to go, and he has demonstrated that he's willing to do just that. So no, unfortunately, I don't see many within the Republican Party having a conscience and a moral compass to actually speak up against this president. And those who have done it, and I continue to applaud them, but most unfortunately, whether they are elected officials or not, won't.
And we've seen over the course of these last few weeks, we've seen the president make the decision to change his rally date so that he did not necessarily disturb or disrespect the sanctity of Juneteenth. And so he made a conscious decision, I guess, because he didn't want to, after having conversations with his Black friends and colleagues, that he didn't necessarily want to disturb the holiday. But we continue to still see many of these elected officials, Black and white alike, who continue to make these statements, who continue to go on their platforms, whether it be on press conferences or going on TV and doing live TV. They have all this going on, but we still don't see anyone, talking about the actions that need to be taken. Firing the police. Police chief stepping down is one thing. Firing immediately the gentleman who shot the young brother who was just passed a couple of days ago. We've seen autopsies. We've never seen autopsies come back these fast in my life. In the last two situations, we've seen autopsies come back within a day or so. But we don't see anybody talking about really policy or talking about how do we put in place protection, actual real life protections that literally put the ownership back on, again, police officers and those who practice hate. Georgia is still one of 4 states that does not have hate crime law on the book. And we actually potentially have it just went back today into session. They have 9 days after today going in session. And they're literally holding up a hate crime bill. Why do you think that people are so concerned or so scared to put some type of protections in place so that we can make sure that we're able to hold people literally accountable for what they're doing, and not just trying to do this vague, this vague figuring out of what the law says to try to justify the means?
One of the reasons I believe is because politics is also very simply about special interests.
Mm-hmm.
And there are a lot of special interests that have the ear, and they're competing against one another, that have the ear of a lot of policymakers in this state,
Mm-hmm.
and across the country. And I think it dovetails and juxtapose that, of course, to the overall voting issue, right? When we look at a lot of young Black voters, by and large, in this last Democratic presidential primary, they supported Bernie Sanders.
Mm-hmm.
Again, they were unable to translate those into actual votes. And one could argue that some of his policies would have been, of course, very beneficial to African Americans, Medicare for all, right? But then, of course, you have the older Black voter population that are in many respects paralyzed by pragmatism, and that when faced in their mindset, when faced, of course, with the second term of Donald Trump, they opted for the status quo. And this very moment that we're in, and with the protests, they being young people again, are rebelling against the strangulation of the status quo. They are, quite frankly, tired of it. Fannie Lou Hamer said in the Delta of Mississippi, sick and tired of being sick and tired. And they are sick and tired of being sick and tired. And so, Black leadership often manages the conditions rather than changing the conditions. And what we hear people saying, and they're saying vocally, we need you to change the system, whether that means bringing the system down completely or at least making gradual change so that all can have access and equal opportunity to the same thing. And quite frankly, just to let Black lives live. And they have not seen that. Quite frankly, we haven't seen it for the last 400 years. And so there is a movement, there's a shift. The ground has shifted in our country. And I'm not particularly convinced that historic institutions, which includes many of our historically Black colleges, universities, Black churches, and other institutions, are actually understanding the moment and understanding the message that young people are illustrating and saying and protesting with.
And it's so interesting because, we're also seeing a lot of, we're trying to, we're having these conversations, we're hearing these conversations about, well, who are the next leaders? Who are the leaders of our generation, of our time? And many people are thinking that a lot of the leaders who were classified as leaders, their methods and their way that they're doing things are definitely antiquated. And they're saying, you know what, it just doesn't match us anymore. Who can we, who are we? How do we have these conversations with some of our leaders who have been in the forefront, not to necessarily tell them to leave, but how do we tell them, how do we get this conversation of who's your next? Because we don't hear a lot of who's your next. So how do we get these leaders who we have deemed as the leaders of the movement, or the leaders of Black America, if you will? How do we tell them, it's now time for you to start taking all that you have done and pass the torch on so that some others can then take on where it is? How do we do that?
Right, that is a most excellent question, my friend. And when you have the answer, you let me know, because I am quite frankly done having that conversation. I understand. Our parents' generation and grandparents' generation literally have to fight, scratch, beg, and crawl their way to success. And as such, they are very reluctant to let it go. I understand that, right? When you have had to work and go through things that we have read, that we have seen, but not fully experienced, and you are at the top, I get why you want to maintain and hold power. And I'm not going to call any politician because I love them all dearly. But there comes a time where you do have to let it go and pass the torch, all right? Train the next generation. And unfortunately, I have not seen, even in my own career, a lot of that. And so I don't think I quite well. Yes, one could have the conversation. I have been fortunate, at least in the pastoral realm, to have very good mentors who have passed the torch, right? You know that firsthand. But in the other aspects of my career, politics primarily, I have not had those mentors to pass the torch, and we are not seeing that. I think we have to just take the torch. I think we have to take the torch respectfully, of course, honoring their many accomplishments and acknowledging, again, honoring the fact that I or we would not be here if it was not for their sacrifices and their accomplishments. But I think we have to take the torch. And I think we are seeing that and have seen that. And even in this last election, we see that in the current district attorney's race in Fulton County. All right. We see it, or I saw it at least in a city council race here in Washington, D.C., where a 28-year-old Democratic socialist decided to run against an incumbent city council person and won. So we are seeing young people take the reins. We saw it first with AOC when she ran against a 20-plus year incumbent. Mm-hmm. We're seeing more and more of young people saying, look, I thank you, I honor you, I respect you, but we can't wait anymore.
Mm-hmm. And I think that kind of begins the conversation. We have to start having those conversations, and we can go on and on and on about the inequalities within our own systems as far as ageism, sexism, and all of those isms into why we are having a hard time progressing, and so. Because we're limited on time, and I pray, first of all, thank you everybody who was watching, who joined us this week. We apologize about not being here last week, but I'm so grateful that we had a chance to do it this week. And this will be every Monday. Tonight was a special night, so you will catch us every Monday at 7 o'clock. So please join us next Monday at 7 o'clock. But before we leave here, before we go, the last question or the last thing I want to leave or ask is how do we get people to understand that these young people who are and I'm saying young people because a lot of people who are out protesting, a lot of people who are wanting to protest are 20. I'm about 25 and under, give or take. So how do we have the conversation with both? How do we bridge that gap between the generations of saying, listen, these young people want to be heard. Politicians stop being politicians and become public servants again. How do we have that conversation with them? How do we have this conversation with these young people to say, listen, we want to help you channel that message, and then how do we help those individuals who are in the older generation or those who are just simply saying they just want to wreck everything and they just want to tear everything up? How do we help them also understand that if you don't give them another way out, that this is the way that they're going to express? How do we have those three different conversations so that we're all speaking the same language in the same way?
A conversation by memory. Memory and history are not related, but they go hand in hand. And when I say memory, what I'm specifically speaking of is we have to remind, and this is where memory and history comes into play, we have to remind the older generation of their time in the 50s, in the 60s, and in the 70s. And how during those turbulent times, they too were anti-establishment. Something is to be said that when you become older, right, you become more progressive and liberal, or do you become more conservative, right? And so memory is the focal point of that conversation. Mm-hmm. When you remind the elders, I think then they have to listen to this current generation. Because, and I've said this a lot tonight, the reality is, but we were trained and they were trained for a world that does not exist anymore. The global market economy doesn't exist anymore. The age-old narrative of graduate high school, go to college, even if that means taking out loans, perhaps major in English and graduate, doesn't exist anymore. And we have to sit in the uncomfortability, acknowledging that those institutions, those things, those traditions, some of them no longer work for this present age. And there's grave concern when you have the potential leader of the Democratic Party who was older than the current president. So it's a hard conversation to have. Mm-hmm. And both sides have to listen. But memory and history are the two focal points to having the conversation. And both have to listen and be willing. One side has to be willing to become the senior wise advisors, the guides, the ancestors, whispering wise counsel in the ear, while the other does the work. I'll close with this. I heard a mentor of mine say that protesting is a young person's game. And I may not understand it, and I may not even agree with it, but I applaud them for what they're doing. We need more with guidance, sounds and pearls of wisdom, like that.
And I'll leave it there. That is, I think making sure that we find that common ground is important. Again, thank you again so much, Brother Driskell, for joining.
Brother, this has been fun.
Your just who you are and what you provide to the space of academia, to the space of the church, and just of who you are, just as a genuine brother. As I said to your church a year ago, this past Sunday, actually, it's been a year ago this past Sunday. I was there with you a year ago.
You want to preach this Sunday?
We're okay. Actually, we'll talk about that. But anywho, I said to them, you genuinely are someone who is a brother, and I appreciate and value you. And I'm so grateful that those are, again, in my space, and those who are connected to me and others are seeing you as well. I have placed your Twitter handle on the screen. Is there by chance another way that individuals can get to you outside of this? Is this your area? Is there any other way?
Is preferred.
Okay, there's it. And then, of course, I did say he does regularly place. He is a opinion contributor to The Hill, and so he is regular there. So please make sure that you're following those articles that he's placing there. They're absolutely amazing and great reads. Please make sure you follow him also anytime that he is live, again, on either Roland Martin's show or he's on MSNBC or wherever he may be, is always needed somewhere. So what we're going to do is we're going to kind of go off. We're going to try this one more time. So I'm going to give you all the end portion of the video one last time just to see if it does. If in essence, by chance, if in essence does not work, we will go ahead and fade out the show, and I will go ahead and post the video that was created on not just my personal page, but also professional page as well. So again, thank you all so much, and I'll go ahead and play the video, hopefully, and that's how we'll play ourselves out.
Brother PickEd, thank you.
Thank you.
Within the last 30 minutes that things have really taken a turn for the worse. You see behind me our cameraman, William Walker.
Okay, great people. So from what I've seen, we have been unable to actually do the actual video via live. For some apparent reason, I don't know what's happening, but what I will do is immediately after immediately after we end the broadcast here, I will go forth and place the actual video, because I definitely want you to be able to hear the sound of what the news reports are saying and what the video actually is saying and means. So I definitely want to make sure that I post it immediately after we log off here, and I would definitely make sure that that next week's information is together. Please make sure you join us next week. We will actually have 3 young men online with us. Who are absolutely amazing young men. They are rising seniors. I want to say they're rising seniors and in high school. And we want to have a continued discussion with them about how it is that they're feeling in their age group. What is the message that they want people to know and want people to hear? What is the message that's being portrayed even to them? And hearing from there, we hear so much from seniors, and we hear so much, and there's nothing wrong with that, but we hear so much from our older individuals and people my age and even older than me. We hear so much from those groups, but we don't hear enough from the young people. And I mean young people who may not necessarily know what to say, how to say it, or even how to feel. And so this will be an opportunity for us to hear from 3 young Black men, to tell their stories, to talk about how they're experiencing. These 3 young men, I actually had the pleasure of being on a Zoom call this over I think it was Friday. I think it was. I had the opportunity to be on a Zoom call with a group of young students, high school students, and even babies who were in elementary and middle school. I had a chance to be on a Zoom call to hear their hearts and hear what they're saying and hear what this is doing to them. And we need to make sure that we continuously to hear their hearts and hear their voices, because at the end of the day, it's about them. At the end of the day, it's about making sure that we provide a space and an opportunity. We provide a place for them to feel safe, and a place for them to feel as if they belong in a space, and a place for them to also have room to grow and to prosper. If we're not creating a future for them, then what are we creating a future for? So please make sure that you join us right here next Monday at 7 o'clock, where we have discussions. The way that the makeup will be is a little different. And so you will be able to, again, call in. So please make sure you call in at 404-237-8937. Also, beginning next week, there will be a portion and a segment in the middle of our discussion where we call it the lunchtime. So this will be broken down. It's like a school day. So we'll have 2 blocks before, kind of a lunchtime, and then 2 blocks. That lunchtime will go into what we call the lunchbox. The lunchbox will be an email. Every week I'll receive emails from you all, just having a certain question or a certain discussion piece that you want to have placed in the rotation here. So we will actually read your email live on PickEd Speaks, and we will make sure that we address that, because we are talking about politics, education, religion, and so many other areas that are affecting us as African-American individuals. That is the purpose for this platform. That's the purpose for this opportunity, is to bring individuals on to have those discussions. So please, if you want to have your email read, and if you have a question that you want to have addressed right here on PickEd Speaks, please make sure you email us at speak, SPEAK, at sexynerdco.com. I'm probably going to put it on the screen for you so you can actually know where it goes, right? So again, you will send that email to speak at sexynerdco.com. That is how you will get that information to us, and we'll definitely make sure that we receive that email. Please make sure that you send that email to that email address so that we are able to read your comment right here live on PickEd Speaks. Until we meet again, thank you all so much for joining me for our very first PickEd Speaks. This also will turn into a podcast. So anything that you heard today will be recorded live, and you'll hear it the next day. You can also find it on our website you can actually find a replay of this, not just on social media, but you can also go to our website and actually get the actual video that will be downloaded on the website at sexynerdco.com. So you can actually go to sexynerdco.com, which is my personal website, and click on PickEd Speaks, and you'll be able to get the video as well as listen to the broadcast every Tuesday. So they'll be posted on Tuesday. Again, thank you all so much for joining. I love each and every one of you. Until we meet again, God bless each and every one of you. And please stay safe and love each other as I love you. God bless you.